I'm the last survivor of the Holocaust in our family.
Behind the words, pictures, and artifacts in the museum are people whose stories of survival and hope come alive to inspire new generations of upstanders. One by one, these stories stir the soul.
Can there really be hope for us?
See, mine is 4018. My sister was 4017.
Holocaust survivors, their descendants, liberators, champions of justice, and courageous upstanders ask only this: hear my story, so that the lessons they teach will echo for generations.
I will never meet someone else like my father. But there are many of us who, if we come together, can keep his voice alive.
These stories will change you. They will move you to action, inspiring the best of humanity every day. I'm Jackie Congedo, and in today's episode, you'll meet one of this year's Upstander Award winners, Whitney Austin. Her life was upended in 2018 when she was shot multiple times in a mass shooting in downtown Cincinnati. She fought through her recovery, and instead of letting the trauma consume her, she grounded herself in the character strengths of gratitude and hope for the future, dedicating her life to making a difference on the issue of gun violence. In that moment, her organization, Whitney Strong, was born. And since then, she's been a tireless advocate for finding common ground on an issue that is so often divisive and polarized. It's for this work and spirit of humanity and hope that she brings to it that we recognize Whitney at our 2024 Cohen Family Upstander Awards. She joined us to share how she's persevering through her own trauma to help make a difference in others' lives. We are so excited, Whitney, for you to be here with us today. A friend, we've I think, when did we first meet? Back before I was in this role and when you were sort of newly building.
Probably 2019.
Yeah, newly building Whitney Strong. And thinking about your journey since then and sort of, where we are now and the circumstances that bring us together today. It's just awesome to have you here in the museum to share your own Upstander story. And really, we're going to be talking about, a couple of things, right? All that you've accomplished in the space of gun safety, which is certainly more than I can name here, but your advocacy work, your education, Stop the Bleed trainings, all of this important work that you do with Whitney Strong and more. And again, the fact that you've become such an upstander for the work of finding common ground on an issue that seems like, what even is that common ground? Bipartisan ways to make even small steps towards progress on this issue. But before we talk about some of your work, your advocacy work and your education work and, the work particularly on this issue, there was a time when you probably thought relatively infrequently about gun violence. I mean, as much as anyone else would in our society today. I'm wondering if you could take me back to the days before your life was sort of forever changed, almost 6 years ago now, on Fountain Square, at the Fifth Third office building, and sort of tell me about that day, going into that day where your mind was at and sort of what changed for you on that day.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a misnomer that I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about gun violence. I mean, obviously nothing like today, but prior to my shooting, I did care quite a bit about gun violence. Can't really think of another issue I cared more about.
Wow.
But
I don't think
never did anything about it. So I started to pay attention after Sandy Hook. I'll never forget where I was watching that footage 24/7. I had my son at that point, and I was pregnant with my daughter, and it was just this, pivotal moment as a mother that this is unacceptable. What can I do to be on the side of change? But from that moment in 2012 all the way up to my shooting in 2018, I really just watched all of it from the sidelines. I'd read story after story after each shooting. I would cry myself to sleep reading about the victims and their families. I had signed up with an organization and was receiving text messages, but never showed up to a meeting, never sent a letter or an email to a lawmaker. I almost signed up to protest or march for the first time ever with my kids, but there was a downpour that day and I lost my gumption to do it. And so walking into Fifth Third on that day, which was September 6, 2018, I wasn't thinking of any of those things. I mostly moved through the world feeling as if I was safe, but in the back of my brain, I would certainly tell my parents, people watching our children, make sure you have an evacuation plan, know where the exits are. So it was always in the back of my brain, just a little bit, but not enough to really believe it would ever happen to me or my family, and not enough to actually do anything to stop it. And so as I was in that revolving door and I was taking gunfire and thinking a million things, mostly how do I live and get back to my children, one of the things I thought was, this is a mass shooting. There is no other explanation for what this is. And how dare I think that gun violence won't touch me and that I'm immune to it? Because that's what's happening right now. You are being shot in a mass shooting and you have done nothing to stop it. And so while, again, my first thought was, how do I live? How do I get back to my family? Part of what I was thinking was, if I survive, if I get this chance to get back to my family, this is the clearest sign I've ever received in my life that you have to do something about this, because you sat around and you missed your opportunity.
Wow. And you miraculously were given the opportunity to pursue that. You were shot how many times?
12 times. And none of them hit anything important. I mean, it's such a miracle. I remember when they told me that night that 12 times, nothing critical, you're so stable, we don't need to take you into surgery until tomorrow. Again, just the biggest sign I've ever received in my life that you're getting this gift that nobody gets. So you better do something with it.
Yeah, so what's so interesting, and for some people who are watching, you might think, okay, Holocaust Museum, we're sitting here talking about gun safety with a survivor of a shooting. What's the connection here? And what I'm hearing in your story is a similar arc in terms of the upstanders meeting their moments across history and throughout context, right? So it's you're living your life and something happens, or you're activated in some way. In this way, I think it was a really concrete, obviously, activation for you. And what you've done is really tap into your strengths, your character strengths, to use that as a moment not to, fall into a place of, to your point, in sort of paralyzing grief or depression, but actually to activate and to say, I'm going to be part of the solution to this. That must have taken a lot of you say it like it was just a no-brainer, but it has to take actually courage every day to make that decision, given the trauma that you've been through.
It was pretty immediate, and I think it's the history of events, to have been given the opportunity time and time again to participate and denying that opportunity. Certainly there was some guilt. Why didn't you participate? Why didn't you try to make a change? And then pairing that with getting this gift that nobody gets. There are so many people involved in this work to make change, and many of them have been shot one time and they can't walk. They're paralyzed forever. But yet I got 12 and I can walk and I can jump and I can swim and I can do all the things that I need to do minus a push-up, which might not have been able to do a push-up before I was shot. And so it really was pretty immediate. And I think that's a combination of, again, the history of events, the upbringing that I was given through my parents, and the faith that I subscribe to, that, yeah, like, this is it. There could be no clearer sign. This is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that it's easy? No, not at all. Not at all. I am really devastated every time I pay attention to a shooting. Now, that sounds weird, but I can't totally pay attention to all of it, because it really will put me into a dark place and prevent me from being productive. But I can't miss all of them, and it doesn't have to be one kind. I certainly feel closest to mass violence because I know what that's all about. But I've been devastated by children that pick up guns and accidentally shoot themselves or their friends or siblings. I've been devastated by incidents of community violence where young Black males lose their lives to gun violence. I've been devastated by incidents of suicide. So it is hard, but I try to put controls in place to keep me positive and productive, because, devastation doesn't help. It's not going to make this issue any better. It's not going to get us closer to materially reducing gun death and injury. So I just have learned how I work, and I try to stay away from the things that really devastate me.
Wow. It's incredible what you've been able to do. And again, we're going to talk more about that. But I want to take you back to our Upstander Awards this year. So for those who don't know, we have a Cohen Family Upstander Month, which celebrates folks like Whitney, people who are using their character strengths to stand up and do great things for themselves, their communities, and other people, and make the world a better place. And so every year we have an awards that we do, and we give obviously a number of community awards, but also a group of leadership awards. And so we have a nonprofit Upstander of the Year award, and this year that went to you. I'm remembering where I was when I shared the news with you that we were going to honor you this year, and your response, which was so humbling. I wonder if you can kind of walk us through what that was like for you, the whole experience of being recognized, as an upstander, in the context of sort of in memory of, in honor of so many people who survived other horrific things and came back with a spirit of resilience and hope and agency. Mm-hmm. What has this been like for you, receiving this award?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'm sure I said something like, are you sure? There are a lot of people. It does still strike me often that, I'm not doing enough because people, are still dying. So that is hard, but I try to pair that with, we are doing a lot and we're making progress. And I think for me, what started to settle in once I started to get a sense for who all of the other honorees were, that I was in not only good company, but the best company. And, in other aspects of my life, I gravitate toward nonfiction. So give me all the biographies, give me all the real humans in the history of the US and the history of the world that have done great things, because I need to keep being inspired. This is tough stuff. And so if I can see it, if it was real, then I feel like I can keep going. And so here I was surrounded by those exact humans, both alive and have since passed. And, you feel like you're in the right place. And if I'm being honest, I don't think I got enough time with them. I wish that I could go to lunch with every single one of them and continue the relationship. And that's on me. I'll keep working on that. But, I just felt like I was in the right place. And it felt like a really special honor, one of the most important to me since I've been doing the work.
Wow. Does that have to do with, obviously the company that you were in, right? And other people who were honored, and the history. What's special about this event and sort of the recognition is the community awards are named after survivors and other upstanders in our museum, and whose stories we educate about and share. And so in a way, we actually get to recognize the contribution and the strength of not just our upstanders, but also our survivors. Thinking back to that night and all of the stories that were told of incredible strength of character and humanity amidst really dark moments. And I'm just, when you say, this is one of the most meaningful, is that sort of what you're getting at, or is there other things that, strike you as being different or stand out about this recognition?
It's absolutely that. So often awards are about one human. Not a fan of that. I don't really like things being about me. And so for this to be a community of people who have decided, I'm about others first, not about me, was really special. So yeah, I really can't think of anything like it. And both from the angle of who you choose to honor, but secondly, the community aspect of it. I think it's really important because every single person that was honored is doing something very important. I say all the time, of course, I want you to go all in to prevent gun violence, but there are plenty of issues that we need to solve for in this country. And we need people just like me in every single one of them, and not even just like me, but just leaders in all of these areas. And if that is going to continue in perpetuity, like I want for myself for the rest of my professional career, you've got to lift those people up. And these awards matter, but the community matters too. And so this is a way to build community with really special people that I don't think exist in many places.
Yeah. So thinking about sort of the pivot that happened that day 6 years ago, I mean, you talk about how it happened pretty immediately for you, that you were like, this is my life's calling. This is my moment. I know what I need to do and I'm ready to do it. I'm thinking again about the role, the sort of the characterization of upstanders, people who meet adversity with strength of character, rising to meet moments of hardship and injustice. And certainly what happened to you and what happens to so many other innocent people who are affected by gun violence is so unjust. It's such a form of injustice. And again, sort of drawing some parallels here, while obviously the issues are very different and what, people's lived experiences were very different, are survivors, right, who endured such loss and suffering, found it in themselves not just to rebuild, right, to come here and start new chapters. We have a quote from Werner, one of my favorite quotes in our museum is from Werner Koppel, who talks about how he arrived in this building off the trains from Europe with a wife, a baby, and a suitcase, and that started the second part of his life, or I think ended the first part of his life. So this idea that, they had the courage to say, I'm going to choose life in this next chapter. And not just to do that, but actually to dedicate their lives to ensuring that what happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else. And again, while the issues are dramatically different and we wouldn't want to compare the experiences, I could say the same for you, right? As it relates to this moment of incredible personal trauma and adversity and coming out of that with the spirit, not just to say, I have the courage to go on, period, but to say, I have actually new purpose in my life that I'm going to pursue. How do you do that? I mean, you make it, again, seem effortless and sound effortless, but how do you, what were those early days of building Whitney Strong like? I mean, how did you come out of this space of like the darkest day of your life, ready to take it on, head on?
I mean, I think, these type of humans are cut from the same cloth, and I don't know exactly what the it factor is that makes someone behave in this way. I can only speak to myself. The immediate realization that I got everything I wanted in that moment, which was getting back to my family, that it was going to be mine again, was something that no one can ever take away from me. So you think you're dying, and then you're living, and you get to be with your family again. And so it was just immediate sense of, I am rooted in gratitude for the rest of my life, because I didn't, no one deserves to die, or, well, let's just say no one deserves to die. And here I was in a situation in which I got all that back, and it didn't have to come back to me. And then I think it's pairing that experience with, the first 36 years of my life, and kind of, what my experiences and my support system and everyone else groomed me to be. And I do give a lot of credit to my parents, wonderful parents who believed I could do anything and really raised me in a very protective bubble to be optimistic and almost Pollyanna at times. So I think being an optimistic human who believes anything is possible is important. I also think that my faith groomed me into the human I am. I am a Christian, and I believe that life's not about me, it's about other people. So how can I help other people? So that just slid into all of it. And then I have to give props to, growing up in a public school system, going to the University of Louisville, getting my MBA, the many, many years I spent at Fifth Third Bank to become this business-minded person who wants to achieve any goal, let alone a goal that's tied to you receiving this life-changing gift. And I think all of those things combine to put me in a position to lead. And I'm sure if we, dissected all of the survivor stories that we have here, there's going to be a combination of things, because, I don't do any of this alone. I get to this place because of all the love people have poured into me. And I imagine that those survivors had a lot of love poured into them too.
Yeah. I'm listening, and, again, we have this character strengths framework that we use to talk about our humanity work, to talk about, the qualities that make people, the qualities people can activate to stand up. And what I heard from you was, I was like naming them, in my head as you were talking. You talked about spirituality, your faith. You talked about hope, the idea that actually hope, which brings agency. It's like, there is the chance that this will get better. It will get better. You have to have a belief in that to be able to do what you do. Perseverance, your sort of pursuit of higher education and of goals, but also love of learning. And, this idea that, of gratitude, right? The very foundation of that being this deep gratitude for the fact that you have the opportunity to do it. It's really
I will
special.
say I had a really hard time choosing my strength, because
what did you choose? Did I get any of them right there?
Conceited when I say that. That's not what I mean. It more goes back to so many people poured into me that, I feel like I can play in a lot of these areas. I landed on hope because it does feel so central to who we are as an organization. But I felt like there were a lot of good ones there. Yeah.
I was thinking that probably another one is, you didn't mention it really here, but perspective. Actually, yes. I think you did speak a little bit to perspective. In learning more about your work, you are amazing, really so talented at getting people who are on opposite sides of this issue to talk to each other and to think together about what I think are pretty common sense solutions, or at least steps in the right direction. And you're doing this mainly, in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, right?
Ohio and Kentucky.
Okay. Indiana soon.
Yeah.
Yes. At some point, the world.
We
right?
will conquer everyone.
So you're doing this in Ohio and Kentucky, and you've had a certain amount of success in Kentucky, where the idea of gun ownership is enshrined, right? This is something I think you once shared with me, that, your parents, you grew up in a home where, your dad had a gun, or, your family, like, this is, gun ownership is something that, you don't vilify, right? And you've been able to leverage that using the strength of like perspective and how we bring people together to find consensus. Your, mission statement, dedicated to finding common ground solutions to gun death and injury, balancing Kentuckians' tradition of firearm ownership with public safety and the urgent need to ensure the mental health and wellness of gun owners. So there are not a lot of people talking about the middle ground there.
Right.
On any issue, let alone this issue. What does it look, can you like describe for me what the middle ground looks like? Just paint the picture for me and for folks who are watching, because it seems like that is getting harder and harder to find.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to, again, a belief system that I identify with, that life is about others and not about me. So if you care about humans, then by extension, you care why they believe what they believe. So if you go into these conversations one-on-one or a large audience, and you authentically convey that I care about you, regardless of what you think about the Second Amendment, you're in a much better place to receive their input, and in a much better place to get them closer to what you believe is a common ground solution, getting them to the middle. So I will say, it starts with a belief system and my values, that I care about people. So that, again, allows for a better conversation. Been in a lot of different environments and have talked to a lot of different people about this issue, and I'm still surprised every day. And where we tend to agree oftentimes is not around policy, which is hard to hear. But you do need to recognize, if you care about this issue, that we can make change outside of policy, and we do through Whitney Strong. There is a rare bird who says, I don't want you out there teaching the counties that have the highest levels of firearm suicide, those, constituents of that district, the warning signs of suicide. Everybody, let's do it. Let's make sure people know what they look like, they know how to intervene, they know how to have a conversation, and get them over to mental health experts. A rare bird that says, I don't want you out there teaching safe handling and safe storage and distributing thousands of gun locks. A rare bird who says, I don't want you out there teaching people emergency response, stop the bleed, to apply tourniquets. And the more you walk that walk, the more you increase your base of support, because they understand that you're willing to approach this issue from all angles. So that gives you a lot of credibility. Where we don't always disagree is on policy, but even with policy, there are options that everybody can agree upon. Not enough, it's still a small number of options, but the polling data is showing that the policies in which you have overlap between our two major political parties is only growing. And there's other evidence to show that things are shifting there too. For example, in the last year, I've seen a national poll that showed the number of people who count gun violence as their number one issue was somewhere around 7 to 8%. The last time they did that a year ago, it was 1%. So this issue is growing in terms of importance, and that means the number of people who are willing to find common ground is growing too. And so one example I always give is the policy that we have been working to move into law in Kentucky. It's called Crisis Aversion and Rights Retention, CARR for short. It is a form of an extreme risk protection order or red flag law. The purpose of these laws is to provide a legal path to temporarily transfer a firearm away from someone who is in crisis. So crisis in I'm going to shoot myself, or crisis in that I'm going to shoot other people. And in both Ohio and Kentucky, there's no legal path. There's nothing you can do short of committing that person. And that path is fraught with all kinds of issues, including once you're released, oftentimes you're reunited with the firearm that everybody was concerned about in the first place. Nationally, we've seen polling to show that a majority of Republicans support this policy, and the majority of Democrats support this policy. And we took it a step further in the winter of early 2024, and we found that 72% of Republican primary voters support Carr. And this was across the state. It wasn't just in an urban center like Louisville or Lexington, right? Across the state of Kentucky. So that's a really great example. That's a policy that we can all agree on. And that's the perfect example of what we pursue. We're not going to pursue a policy that's on the edge. I can tell you on the right, on the far right, people want more guns in schools, more people carrying schools. On the far left, you've got people who want to ban specific types of firearms. There's not polling to show that that's common ground. So that's not what we pursue. And by sticking in the middle, we've been able to make progress in an area in which, quite frankly, people call it fatalistic. It's gun violence and abortion. And I remember when someone who mentors me said that from the beginning of the fight. And I said, well, I'm not going to listen to you because this is so important and we have to see change. So it's not going to be fatalistic. We're going to have to work on it.
Not take no for an answer.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about when you describe the polls, the polarity of this issue and some, the right, the far right and the far left, or I don't even know that necessarily it always falls along party lines, but there are extremes in this conversation that tend to dominate just because they're loud, right? And in some ways the political incentives are a little broken, I think. But I would imagine as is anyone who is walking the lonely path of consensus, bipartisanship right now, that you take a lot of heat probably from both sides. Folks who feel like, you're not pushing hard enough, on the left, and folks who feel like you're, they'll never meet you there on the right. Would you agree with that? I mean, do you feel like that's lonely at certain times?
Doing this is lonely, but I would not say for that reason. I think that just another reason to count myself blessed. We have really attracted a supporter base that gets the strategy. Now, does that mean that there aren't people within the organization or supporting it that want to see semi-automatic weapons banned? 100%. But do they understand that you have to prioritize and move where you can move? Yep, they've bought into it.
So pragmatic.
Are there people that support Whitney Strong that do want to see more, whether it's armed guards or teachers carrying firearms in schools? Sure. But do they understand that we have two criteria for moving a policy? One, it needs to be supported by the majority. And two, it needs to be evidence-based. And I don't have the evidence that is something we need to do right now. And to be fair, there's not a ton of evidence yet for what semi-automatic rifle bans do either. And so that's just another reason we're not going to move forward with this policy idea over here. And I mean, there are certainly exceptions to the rule, but I think there are enough people doing work in this space now that if those are the things that you want to get done, then you can find a home with them. But we really attract like for like, and I'm so appreciative of that because, I'm asking people to be really restrained on an issue that is tied to children getting murdered in elementary schools and kids getting murdered when they get on the bus in their neighborhood. And I get that that's really, really hard. But from where I sit, this strategy is necessary because mostly what I see in this space is the opposite. Organizations engaging at a political level, engaging with policies that don't stand a chance within a Kentucky legislative environment, an Ohio legislative environment.
An American legislative environment.
Yes. Yeah. And so back to my business upbringing, you've got to come at a problem from multiple angles. And, we're waving the common ground flag. And If anything, more people need to be waiving it because it needs to counter the other approaches. And then if I'm being honest, in the end we get there, and it's not just because of the common ground approach, it's all of them coming together. Because you may have some lawmakers that say, I cannot do what this group is asking me to do on the far left. It's just too extreme. But here's Whitney Strong representing something that seems more reasonable to me. Hey, can I get a meeting with Whitney Austin? So they work together in concert. And so I hope no one hears me saying that one strategy is better than another. I don't think so at all. I just, from the beginning, felt as if this common ground strategy wasn't represented at all. So let's do it. Let's represent that.
Yeah, the pragmatism of that. It's like, I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, who said, fight for what you believe in, but do it in a way that inspires others to join you.
Yeah, and she's got another one about real enduring change and it being real enduring change is incremental change. I'm paraphrasing, but I mean, that's the game that we're playing, incremental change. And I hope that someday, those in a position of power recognize this has been taking way too long. I'm done with this incremental stuff. Let's all come together and just do it, But until we get to that point, this is the way you work it.
Small steps, yeah. The mental health aspect of this work is obviously so personal for you. The Inquirer reported a year after the shooting that the gunman in this case, his mother and his sister on at least 2 occasions argued that he was violent and that he was struggling, right? That he was had mental challenges, mentally ill. There's 2 things I want to ask you about on this topic. The first is, I can't even imagine how difficult this is for you. The idea that, you were talking about the thoughts that were racing through your mind that, like, I had a chance to stand up on this issue before and I didn't. Well, the other side of this was, we had a chance as a society to help this person before it was too late. We didn't. So I wonder if you would just share a little bit about like your thoughts around that. And then I have another question for you.
Yeah, there are still some questions as to, my shooter's history and did he reach the threshold of prohibition? Mm-hmm. It's not been released that he did. Certainly in and out of mental health treatment, court-ordered, but all voluntary. Mm-hmm. In order to be prohibited from possessing firearms in America, you have to be involuntarily committed. And again, that evidence has not been produced. Uh-huh. I certainly think it's quite possible that he was. But again, no one has produced that evidence. And so making sure that those with severe mental illness do not have access to firearms is a great example of a policy that everybody agrees upon. And so for whatever reason, really, I believe it has a lot to do with what is our definition of mental illness, right? Because there are many, many people out there with depression or anxiety or forms of mental illness in which living with firearm ownership is totally doable. But then there are also forms of mental illness where it's not. And so I think lawmakers have been reticent to say, well, here's where I'm drawing the line. And those of you on this side, no guns. And those of you on this side, yes to guns. Instead, and this was part of the Brady Act after the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, when they came up with the rules around who's prohibited, and it was, you have to be involuntarily committed. So I would say that threshold is too high. There is some space between that and voluntary commitment that I believe could be closed and ensure that less people with severe mental illness have access to firearms. Now, that's just the do they get guns? Do they not get guns? Part of the conversation. Above and beyond all of that is, what are we doing to help people who have severe mental health needs in our country? And I think many of us know that in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a huge shift in terms of deinstitutionalization. And, you know, some parts of that were necessary too. We should not be taking people with severe mental illness and, you know, locking them in closets, and there's so many, you know, just awful things that were happening in that period of time. But at the same time, we can't move from one end of the spectrum to the opposite, which is, and we're just going to, you know, allow these people within society without any, you know, support systems to help them move forward one foot in front of another. And so, you know, we talk a lot about this issue as a mental health issue, which is not fair. Gun violence is not solely a mental health issue. It's many, many factors coming together. But to the extent that it is a mental health issue, what are we doing to make sure that Americans have access to mental health care? Make sure it's affordable, make sure it's accessible, all of the things that we've just fallen down on. And I'm a perfect example. After the shooting and leaving Cincinnati to go back home to Louisville, I'll never forget that my trauma team said, "You need to see a psychiatrist." And I said, "Yep, I do need to see a psychiatrist. Good idea." I get back to Louisville. I spend days calling around to practices that were recommended to me by my cousin, who is a psychiatrist. Of the 7 calls that I made, only 2 offices called me back. One was too far away. I wasn't going to drive, you know, an hour round trip to see a therapist. And the other, of course, worked out. But I left messages and said, I was in a mass shooting. I was shot. My trauma team is saying I need to see a therapist. So I'm not just a run-of-the-mill human asking for mental health support. This is an acute situation. And only 2 of them called me back out of 7. One was not going to work because it was too far away, and luckily the one did work. Now that's just the time I spent trying to get to a therapist, the poor processes within the offices to return my call. And we're not even getting into what it takes to carve out time in your schedule to get to a mental health therapist. And we know that there are many Americans that can't just work that into the middle of their, you know, work day. And also, I'm not talking about cost. And my cost was taken care of because, you know, I worked for Fifth Third Bank. So that's not applicable to a lot of people in this situation. But you can't get them to call you back. You may have to travel an hour to get to them. It's hard to work it into your workday, and it's extremely expensive. I mean, my practice doesn't even take insurance, and that's the way the best ones are. So, again, privileged human over here, and that's my experience. So what's happening to all the other people in America? What happened to my shooter? I already know what happened to him. I already know. I mean, I don't have to do that research. I am sure that we fell down in many, many places over the history of his life, providing him the support that he needed. And so that's how he got to that place, combined with other factors. So I want that to change.
I have to stop you there, because what you just did, I think, is really incredible, and you did it effortlessly and just sort of like second nature. But the fact that you really, I mean, you come out of this, right, changed forever, horrific trauma, and you can find it in yourself to humanize the person who caused you that, to the point of saying, if we're going to solve for this, let's think about the people, what drives them to commit something like this, what drives them to do that, and how do we solve for that? How do we help them? How do we help them? I mean, it's just unbelievable to me. It's easy, I think, for others who have not been victimized in such a proximate way, it's easier to say that. But for someone who has had this, such a personal experience, to be able to think, just sit back and like it's nothing, say, we need to focus on helping the people who are, you know, potential perpetrators of this. That's not a little thing.
Well, I mean, it's a whole preventative strategy. If you want to prevent violence, and root causes are things like poverty and lack of mental health support, education, all of those things. Yes, it is humanizing someone, but the other side of that is, but it's
Pragmatic.
protecting
Yeah.
innocent life.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
had we done what we should have for him, how many more lives could have been saved on September 6th? And not just with mass violence, with community violence and all the other forms. And then the other thing I want to say about that is I think that I can have this perspective, or I know I can have this perspective because I got that gift. I'm rooted in gratitude. I think it would be infinitely more impressive if one of the families who lost a loved one on September 6th could say that. And I wouldn't expect them to, because they've lost the loves of their lives. And so I think that's really important to call out too. Like, back to privilege. I am doing this work from a place of privilege because I lived. I got everything I ever wanted. So many leaders in this space, it is the opposite. They are doing this work because they lost everything they ever wanted. So what I was saying is, don't put me too high up on a pedestal. I got what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important to remember.
Well, and in some ways, this allows you to come at this from a place of possibility and hope and gratitude,
Right.
which is a different starting point than grief and loss and anger. And it's not to say one's better than the other,
Right.
but it is a distinguishing difference in approach and sort of your mindset and what grounds you.
And I do think it adds responsibility. So, I need to be strong when they can't. We should not put this work on their shoulders, but the vast majority of these leaders, that's their story, and it's unfair. It's totally unfair. So, if I'm being honest, that's what drives me too, is I want to stand up and be strong for the people that shouldn't have to be.
Yeah. Wow. All right. I want to end on a hopeful note, since we're talking to someone with the character strength of hope. Just this year, the Surgeon General in the United States made an announcement declaring gun violence to be a public health crisis, which feels like, if we don't know what the problem is, how can we solve for it? Like, we have to acknowledge what's going on, and we have to have data to talk about that. So it feels like a step forward. And, at the same time, the Department of Health reports that 6 in 10 adults worry sometimes, almost every day or every day, about a loved one being a victim of gun violence. That this is like part of our sort of collective, regular consciousness in this country. Again, it's a testament to your perspective, and you can say also to the good fortune and the privilege that you have to be able to come at this from a place of possibility and survival, and that you and not necessarily loss in that way. But it's a testament to the fact that you are focused not on ostracizing gun owners, and on hope that we can make progress on this issue. Can you share maybe a moment, an anecdote, when you have like a really hard day? I'm thinking about, the day we were texting back and forth, the day of the mass shooting in Louisville. Your hometown, it's so close to home for you in so many ways. On those days, what grounds you? Like, what moment or anecdote do you go back to that brings you back to a place of gratitude and hope?
There are a lot, and I try to communicate them regularly to our supporters. But the pinnacle of moments of hope has to be the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which happened in June of 2022. Back to the federal government not doing what it's supposed to do on this issue. They did do what they were supposed to do in that moment, and it was 28 years in the making. And there were a lot of groups that worked to get us to the point of passage, but the part that felt most tied to Whitney Strong was, we had started lobbying Leader McConnell back in 2019. And at that point, we went in asking for him to lead on comprehensive background checks, which, by the way, is another example of a common ground policy. 85% plus of Republicans support it, 95% plus of Democrats support it. I go into that meeting with my PowerPoint slides and my data, and, just like I'm doing a presentation for the bank. Well, learned really quickly that none of that mattered in that conversation. There was some unknown that I couldn't put my finger on that was preventing them from supporting that piece of legislation. It was really, really hard because I thought, well, what's been missing is people aren't pushing common ground solutions and being respectful in these conversations, and, we'll just resolve that. Oh, no. Again, there's some unknown that I'm not completely understanding in this moment, but this isn't going to be easy. And so over the course of the next, 3 years, many instances of bumping into Leader McConnell and meetings with staff and just, let me bring you along. Let me help you understand what this issue is really all about, and help you understand that you're in a safe space politically to support these policies. But that has to be happening along with the timing needs to be right. And in May of 2022, Uvalde happened. And right before that, the race-motivated mass shooting happened at Tops Supermarket. So it's kind of a back-to-back for Americans to say, no more. And
it's in Buffalo you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so people were activated in a way that I've not seen before. I mean, on our own, thousands of emails through Whitney Strong into lawmakers at the federal level. And I'll never forget being in the office of Senator Young, who's a Republican out of Indiana, and hearing from his team the emails, the phone calls, they're incessant. We've never seen anything like it. This is really good. This puts us on a path toward passing something. And so, long story short, before that piece of legislation was even released, like the text, Leader McConnell had said, we're going to engage because we needed ours. We had the House who was willing to do everything. But on the Senate side, we needed 10 R's to join in with the 50 Dems to make sure the filibuster could be broken. And so before they even released the text, Leader McConnell said, we have our 10. Senator John Cornyn out of Texas is leading for the Republicans, and we're committed to getting this done. And so we were asked to come up to D.C. and to do everything we could to get more Republicans to sign on to that piece of legislation. And in the end, there were 15 Republicans who signed on. And I'll never forget being in the Senate gallery with my kids and my husband and some other people from Whitney Strong and good friends in this work, like Daniel Barden from Sandy Hook Promise. And we're just sitting there watching all of those votes come in, including an aye from Leader McConnell, who had been a no 3 years ago. And not only was he an aye, he orchestrated the whole thing. And I just thought, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. This thing that I believed in, bringing people together, finding common ground, this is that in action. And so, I was giddy for months. I'm still giddy talking about it. But the most important thing, of course, is that the legislation is already saving lives. But the second most important thing is it's real. It happened. No one can ever take it away from me or anybody else that participated in that work. And so when I have a bad meeting with a lawmaker, Leader McConnell flipped. Anything can happen. So just keep working, just keep representing the right strategy, and more people will flip, and we'll get ourselves to a place of, hopefully 1 out of every 10 Americans is worried on a daily basis that gun violence is going to impact them, because we have materially reduced the numbers of deaths and injuries in America.
It's incredible. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, for showing, for being this example of what it's like to lead from a place of positivity and hope. It's really special to hear you talk about it and the way you light up in talking about how you've seen that and it actually does exist and it does work. And so I am excited for the next time we get to talk to hear what's happened since. No doubt there's a bright future, and just appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. And we need the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to happen at the state level. And so we're going to be working in Kentucky and Ohio. So if you don't follow Whitney Strong, make sure to follow Whitney Strong so you can get engaged.
Thank you. Thank you so much. To make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Let us know your thoughts on this episode. Our email is in the show notes. You can also connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at Holocaust and Humanity, and X and Facebook at CincyHHC. Hear My Story is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. The center's mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust inspire action today. This series is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling and is generously supported by Margaret and Michael Valentine. Visit us in person at Historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online at holocaustandhumanity.org. Managing producer is Ann Thompson. Consulting producer is Joyce Kamen. Technical producer is Robert Mills. Technical director is Josh Emerson. Select music is by Kik Lee. This is recorded at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center in Cincinnati, Ohio.